6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There you go, Katie.
Some things never change, Byron. Thank you for kicking us off, even online. Well, good morning. Thank you for joining us today. We'll start by doing a roll call.
Mr. Bess. Okay. Ms. DeLosa.
Here.
Mr. Durham.
Present.
Dr. Ernest.
Present.
Mr. Gastineau.
Here.
Ms. Hamill. Mr. Mapes.
Here.
Ms. Moat.
Here.
Ms. Renschler.
Here.
Mr. Watts.
Here.
Dr. Jenner.
Here.
Mr.
We'll
Bess.
probably want to watch for Scott to join. I think he does plan to join. Iris is not able. She's the only one not able to.
I'll keep an eye.
Let's please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
The motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the September 13th, 2023 board meeting?
So moved.
Second. With a motion and a second, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So a few things since 2 weeks ago, last month's meeting. First of all, what an incredible discussion with Patricia Levesque of ExcelinEd and Dr. Tim Knowles from the Carnegie Foundation who flew in to be with us, to challenge us on how we might rethink high school and really, quite frankly, lead the nation on a lot of this work to make the 4 years of high school as valuable as possible for kids. So that work continues and is ongoing. As you may recall, we're in the process of stakeholder meetings now and gearing up for the Indiana legislative session beginning in January, of which we will ask for maximum flexibility for the State Board of Ed to affirm some rules ahead. It is also October, which is National Principals Month. Governor Holcomb has proclaimed October 16th through 20th as Indiana Principals Week. And as you know, we have over 2,200 schools across our state, and all of them are led by someone who is no doubt has to be dedicated and all in to keep improving for kids, and also supporting their teachers, their staff members, and their families and communities. So thank you to all of our principals. I see Todd Bess, Executive Director of the Principals Association here. Please send our well wishes to our principals. Also, since we last met, we have some exciting updates for you. And I see Scott Bess has joined. Put him on the record. He is here. So on Monday, we announced the 2024 Indiana Teacher of the Year, Mr. Eric Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins is a high school English language arts teacher at Franklin Community High School. And what was pretty cool is so often for the Teacher of the Year that the teacher's described as, charismatic and over the top and passionate, and all of these various adjectives come out over and over, whether I talk to the principal or superintendent or others. They described his very calm presence in the classroom. And they said his calm presence definitely, even for some students who may spend some time in the office, it even calms them. So it was really cool to see that in action. And he also really works with students on how to think so that they can find their own voice and really determine their path ahead. So huge shout out, congratulations to our 2024 Teacher of the Year, Mr. Eric Jenkins from Franklin Community High School. We also announced last month the 11 Blue Ribbon schools as named by the U.S. Department of Education. And these schools were honored for their exemplary, high-performing work. I do not have the list here. I'll make sure I have it in November, and I'll read those schools off to you. And then finally, we also announced the recipients of the Artificial Intelligence Platform Pilot Grant. We are investing about $2 million to impact around 45,000 students in about 112 schools. And I believe it's around 2,500 teachers will be trained in how to leverage AI for the good, for the benefit in their classroom. We know it's here. I hit that 2,500 teacher piece, teacher and educator piece, because Ed Week recently came out and said 87% of all educators serving in schools have never received any training in AI. I'm honestly surprised it's not higher than that, but these teachers in these schools will really help us learn as a state what may be possible in the future with AI. We want to know the good and also what's not working that we need to get fixed. So more to come on that. I'm really looking forward to sharing publicly and with the board the presentation today about chronic absenteeism data. If you recall, as a board, that came up in discussion, like very unplanned, I think in July and in August, when we were talking about our student learning data in Indiana. And there was a pretty robust discussion by the board about, I wonder what absenteeism is looking like. Are students coming to school so that we can provide the intervention and remediation needed? So we will give you a full look today at exactly what we're seeing post-COVID. It's also very, very timely discussion because the New York Times just 3 weeks ago did a national analysis that we'll share a bit about. And then I got a call from a researcher out of Washington, D.C. just last week asking about chronic absenteeism in Indiana, but looking across the nation at all of the data. All states are being hit on this. So we'll take a look at that data today. At this time, I will open it up to any other board member comments and reports. All right, seeing none, we'll open it up to public comment. Monica, do we have any today? No. Okay, all right, no public comment today. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
With a motion and a second, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda passes, and we will shift straight to discussion. So let's get right into our attendance data. And Dr. John Keller, our Chief Information Officer, is going to present today. So thank you, John.
My pleasure.
And you might have to get that mic.
All right. Greetings, Dr. Jenner, members of the board. It's been a little while since I've had the pleasure of addressing you all, so looking forward to this discussion. All right. So I'm going to go through a number of slides here, and anybody is welcome to stop me at any time to ask questions, and there may be some other people who will need to chime in on some of the answers, but we'll begin. So these are the three things we'd like to talk about today, kind of framing the discussion, kind of looking at what the challenges are nationally and how those may be mirrored in Indiana, what we're doing to elevate student attendance while staying close to what we're actually able to do, and then last slide or two talks about the roles that people can play in helping to address what's clearly an issue. So I want to start with some definitions. There are three definitions on the screen, And it's important to understand each one of them because at some level, all three are still in use. And we'll start with what we consider a school-focused measure, and that is sort of taking the number of days that all of your students could have attended and as the denominator, and all of the days that actually were attended as the numerator. And what that does, I mean, that leads to things like attendance rates well above 90% for nearly every school in the state, right? So when it's presented that way, and if you think about that a little bit, what happens is the great attendance of one student can mask the very poor attendance of another student, right? So you're kind of blending that together. So it's not that it's an invalid measure of attendance, it's just very important to understand the nuance of that. So when we shift over to the right side, we're looking at more student-focused metrics. We sort of have two ways of thinking about that. One is a little bit more on the positive side, like how many kids are attending 94% of the time or greater, which is the metric we're using on GPS, and we'll come back to GPS a few slides from now. Or chronic absenteeism, which nationally is defined as missing 10% of school days for any reason. So 10% or more, I should add. All of the information today, it's important to keep in the back of your mind. When a student is listed as chronically absent, they have hit the 18 days, but we're not going to talk about whether it's 19 days or 20 days or whatever, but it's at least 18 days because 10% of 180 school days is 18. So again, we think probably the more useful, especially when you think about how to actually effectuate change in schools, probably want to focus on the student-focused definition. That's where there's real work to be done. So according to a New York Times study, nearly 10% of K-12 students were not there. The preliminary data suggests our chronic absenteeism rate is higher than that. 1/4 of U.S. students are qualified as chronically absent. Fortunately, we are lower than that, but we're still way too high. And the number has been rising since the pandemic, which is probably no real surprise to any of you. When we look at this data, and again, this is coming from the New York Times study or article, when you're controlling for socioeconomic status and race, children who skip more school get significantly worse grades. And then taking that a step further, looking at the NAEP data, you see we're looking at two different groups of students here, those who are eligible for free reduced lunch and those who are not, left side, right side. And then the key at the top shows how having perfect attendance or being absent 0 days actually plays out across those NAEP scores. And you can see there's a pretty dramatic effect. One thing that I found interesting in this data is that being absent 3 days or more has an effect. So again, I can't tell you in their sample how many were at that lower end of the threshold, but certainly setting that threshold so low and seeing that between 1 to 2 days and 3 or more days, there's the steepest decline, certainly indicates that what we would expect, that attendance matters in performance. So as we kind of turn the corner from that national picture to the state picture, just like you to reflect on this question for a second, how many school buses do you think could be filled with students if all of our chronically absent students came to school on the same day?
Don't look ahead.
Anybody?
I did.
I know you did. I saw it. That's why I was looking at
If
you.
you looked ahead, you can't answer, but does anybody want to hazard a guess?
Who wants to guess? Come on, Byron. Do you look ahead? What's your guess?
All right. Well, if the suspense is killing everyone, we'll just go forward. But so 3,086 school buses, right? That means an average school bus holds 72 students. If you're kindergartners, it holds 48 adults. So we went with a more conservative estimate here. If you used 48 as your number, it'd be over 4,000. So again, sometimes it's yes, some shock value to that, but it helps to illustrate the magnitude of the challenge, right? Now, we don't ever really expect to have a perfect attendance on a particular day of the year. Life happens, but again, just trying to help people understand that we're not talking about a a small amount of people here. And that really translates into 221,000 students. That's 19.3% of our students. So when you think about it that way, it's a big number, right? All right, starting to get into a few of the charts and graphs. This is just showing how that's changed over time. You can kind of clearly see the impact of COVID there. Happy to share that, you know, at least we're declining this year. Again, it's sort of, if one must find a silver lining here, is that the number is going in the right direction. We hope that that continues in this school year. But clearly we're far away from 2018-19 when there were 10.6% of students who were meeting that definition.
So probably the comparative here to go back to nationally, it's around a quarter, so around 25% across our nation are chronically absent using that same definition. Again, as John said, we're at 19.3%. I mentioned that a researcher from DC called. Their question was really around some states did not show 2020 and 2021 data as showing any impact with attendance, which of course we were in the thick of COVID. And then there are a few of us as states that are more outliers in that, and we show like, hey, yeah, we did have a problem that year. I think that probably had to do in talking to John and others with the data quality. I mean, our schools did a remarkable job during COVID, keeping honest data. If you remember, we had multiple codes. Are you virtual due to COVID? Are you, right? We had multiple codes, so we had really, really solid data. That's also the year that we were prepping for EdFi. If you recall, during COVID, we were, at the start of COVID, we did not have a platform that could tell us what everyday attendance was across the state. So we were doing a lot of calling to schools to check, are you in, are you, right? But then EdFi launched in July of 21.
Yep.
And
Actually,
that
July of
pilot
20.
year had been 2020, 2021. So
Actually,
again,
July of 20.
that's a hats off to the robust data keeping that we had in Indiana. So we really had a pretty solid picture of what was happening. Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah,
Thanks, Sean.
and just a little more color commentary on that. When we were getting ready to launch EdFi, we knew we needed to pilot with some schools. And what we did, instead of piloting with a few schools, we piloted a limited number of data collections with every school. So this decision was made in 2019 in the fall. So no one knew what COVID was then. But one of the three data collections we picked was daily attendance. And so in the midst of all those school closures in the spring, we were beginning to actually collect. We got about 180 million or 200 million records that spring about attendance. And then we were, as Dr. Jenner alluded to, we were sending out memos and guidance about how to use those 9 attendance code.
Yeah.
Dr. Mapes remembers that. So yeah, I think we're an outlier for the reasons Dr. Jenner mentioned. I think our data was more solid and realistic. One would expect there to be attendance problems in that time period. So when we look at the 23, kind of narrowing now from the historical to the most recently available data for schools, if you organize schools from most chronic absenteeism to least, this is another way to think about it. So of the 2,228 schools that we sort of rank top to bottom, 1,651 have at least 1 in 10 who are chronically absent. And then as you work your way down through the list, you see that we end up with 84 of those 2,228 schools having at least 1 in 2 that are chronically absent.
So 50% of their
50%.
kids are chronically absent the whole school year.
How does this look across grade levels? Probably not a surprise here. Kind of a bimodal kind of distribution with it tailing up in the high school years. When we start to break this down by other demographic characteristics, you see the red line there is the state average, and you can see which groups are exceeding the state average as a proportion of that population and which ones are under it. And so you can see that some of the this is a point we're making sort of toward the end, but you can see that some of the students who showed the most decline due to COVID are above this state average.
Yeah, I think this slide right here is really important for us to acknowledge, not only as a state, but also in local communities. If we are targeting and really trying to invest dollars in moving the needle in student learning across all students, and specifically acknowledging some of our student populations, when we look at the chronic absenteeism, I think it goes back to a board discussion in July or August. Might that be a root cause? And I think we see right here, gosh, I mean, it could absolutely be a root cause. And I'm sure for the chronic absenteeism, there are additional root causes that we have to be aware of. But this is a pretty jarring slide for our state.
Yeah, kind of being at school is kind of table stakes, right? None of the other sort of plans and interventions we have may be able to come up with are going to matter much if the students aren't there. All right, this sort of shifts that back to that longitudinal, so you can sort of see how different groups may have changed over time. Prior slide is 2023 data, then this kind of layers in the last 4 or 5 years. We shift to how this population kind of breaks out over another demographic category of socioeconomic status, free, reduced, and paid lunches. This is another way to sort of see how that characteristic shows up in chronic absenteeism. And then a further breakout would be looking at English learner status and non-English learner status. Again, maybe you expect to see this, maybe not, but there's certainly the English learners are more prone to the chronic absenteeism. So kind of landing on a few things here before we talk what some of the things are that the department's working on. 4 key takeaways. We're 8% higher than we were before COVID. We have some schools that have 50% chronic absenteeism rates, in fact, 84. And we have chronic absenteeism becoming more of an issue in high school grades. And then finally, the demographic groups with the biggest gaps in ELA and math following the pandemic are above our state rate. So if you want to kind of distill the data that we were looking at, the Indiana picture, into sort of 4 key takeaways, that would be what we'd say. We have a few more things to share, but we'll pause there. I see there's Ms. Moser,
Yeah.
hand up. Yeah.
Katie, I see your hand raised.
Thank you. I'm going to take it down.
You might have to really lean into your mic, Katie, or in our team, if you could turn that volume up. So try it again, Katie. Let's see if we have your volume good.
I moved my speaker closer. Did that help? Yes.
It did help, and they're going to turn the volume up in here. So we can hear you, Katie.
Cool. Dr. Keller, I'm just curious, do we know, I love the way that the data has been disaggregated. I am also curious if we can find out how many of those are foster youth or are, somehow in the juvenile justice system. Anyway, so if the answer, whatever that answer is, I am just really curious about that as well, reflecting on the foster youth report we had earlier this calendar year, and any intersection, again, also to adjust our expectations for what does success look like? We know it's not 100% reasonably, and it seems like we should think about that population of students and the interventions that might be needed, as well as the ability to move the needle within that population differently. And if that's true, then how does that adjust expectations for what success would look like for this entire pool of 4,000 students?
Yeah, good question. So I want to make sure, because I did miss, you were talking about the students in juvenile justice system?
Specifically, Katie asked about foster youth and students
Yes.
in the juvenile justice system.
I do not have those numbers off the top of my head, but we can certainly look in the data and give you some information about how that's breaking out. Probably, we should be able to do that over time as well, not just the most recent year.
I really appreciate that. I'm sorry, I'm really trying to like shout into the speaker and hopefully, but the reason I think that's relevant, or my hypothesis why we care about that is the ability to impact performance there is likely different. And so again, as we're trying to understand and define success, I think my suggestion is that we would consider just breaking those buckets apart, because there are so many other levers and factors and things that when you think about just strategically what has outsized value and impact, that may not be the best place to focus, because it's such an intertwined, complex system of resources and players and factors and other things. So just to be clear, that's why I think that data point will be interesting to help drive our thinking about some of the interventions that I know you're going to talk about in a minute, and what success or movement we should expect to see across the entire 4,000. So that's my rationale.
Hey, Katie, just a quick follow-up, and I know several other board members have thoughts. That 4,000, can you be specific what 4,000 you're referring to? Like the 4,000 number.
Okay. Yeah. I'm talking about the school buses full of kids.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
What was that?
She was talking about the school buses full of kids, and that's what she was referencing on the 4,000.
Yeah.
Which I'm glad you clarified, because I thought you were referring to a different data set there. And to Katie's point on the question about foster youth, juvenile justice, I think that's important to look at. And then I also think to the bus loads, I'll get straight to the student number. 221,000 students are chronically absent. 221,000. Significant. So I think, Mr. Mapes, I saw your hand up, and you might have to pull your mic closer.
Usually
I think
my
this
voice
auto
usually
adjusts
carries,
for
but-
my voice.
First of all, what great data about why we need to reimagine high schools. I mean, with those numbers, we need to make it more relevant for those students, and maybe that will help bring that absentee number down. Second, when we have 1 and 2 students in 84 schools, do we know what those schools are doing to address that problem? And within the department, we're working with them, or how are we following up with them to say, hey, you have a huge issue here. And I'm certain their data can't be that good if they have that many students gone all the time. So thanks, John. I mean, we talked about this.
Yes.
This has an impact. And our overall results, and whether or not, kids are going to be able to read.
Yeah.
And when we look at that K1, 2, 3 data, they can't be absent that many times. And I realize just what you said, Katie, there are other factors here, right? And whether it's a student is ill, not being able to come to school, we go through all the germ sharing that happens in early primary elementaries, and sometimes that causes some of this, but it doesn't matter. When you're not there and present every day, you're not going to get the same quality of education.
Absolutely. Erica.
Yeah, I'd like to know, my questions regarding the 84 schools that have that high chronic absenteeism rate. Do they have certain things in common? Like, for example, are some of them unable to provide transportation? Because when I think about absenteeism, you got to get there. And so, I don't know if we have that data disaggregated regarding those schools specifically, to see if those factors would even tie into some of the issues at some of the other schools.
I would expect that there is some commonality. I don't know that there's 1 or 2 things we could say that would explain the entirety of it.
There's 3,000 buses, but there's the need for 4,000 drivers. I mean,
Yeah, that's true.
that's part of it, right? I mean, we're struggling everywhere across the United States of getting kids to school and having drivers of buses to get them there.
And I think, Erica, that's a really good question. I'll be very real with the board, and I shared this with some of you on calls this week. I really debated on whether we should share this like right now or delay a bit until we have some more answers. as to what are the commonalities, as one example. But as we talked as a team, we didn't feel like we could wait. Right? It's October. The first quarter is gone. We have to draw attention to this right now, and there's no time to waste. So I appreciate the questions that you may have that we may need to follow up on again. It's very helpful. Okay, so I see William's hand, and I also see Byron. William and then Byron.
So great information, and it's information that we can utilize to make progress. But my question is on the other side. So we know about these absenteeism. So I'm looking at the slide from ethnicity for 2022 and 2023. So if 30.7% of black kids are chronically absent, that would mean that 69.3% of those kids are actually attending school. And of course, that would apply to all of those groups as well. So my question becomes, do we know how those 69.3% of black students who are attending, do we know how they are performing academically?
Yeah, we would know that. I mean, I can't quote, like that NAEP slide that showed the difference between two groups. That's what you're asking, like kind of show outcomes for these two groups, the positive side of it and the negative side that's on this. We can definitely do that.
And that's absolutely our next level of analysis, right? And I thought you were going one direction, William. I think your question is really important. How does it correlate with the actual data? We know what the research shows, that there's a significant correlation. But the other question I thought you were going to ask, which I think is a layer that we're interested in, is of that 69.3% of black students who are attending or who are not chronically absent, meaning they were at school at least 7, or they did not miss 18 or more days. What is, across all ethnicity groups, across all student populations, what's the breakdown of how many are 3 days or less to the NAEP scores? Significant, right? How many are habitually truant, which is Indiana statute, 10 days or more? So I think there's more information that we need to know and that will be helpful. But I think this is where so often we talk about the support that we're trying to give to our principals and our teachers and our school personnel. I think this is really a rally cry for us to look at our parents, families, caregivers, and also our community leaders to come up with some solutions that might help. The reality is culture eats policy for breakfast. Culture eats policy for breakfast. So if we have a national culture of chronic absenteeism, we could sit as a board and pass a number of policies today, but the culture is not there. So, and it goes back to what Pat was saying about the educational value that we have for getting kids to school. And I think your point about rethinking high school, gosh, I feel like the data keeps coming at us, right? The Gallup survey from the parents said you got to rethink high school. Our student data says you have to rethink high school. And yet another point to add to when we look at that curve, and students are just more likely to be chronically absent in high school. Byron.
Thank you, Katie Drucker. You were quoting Peter Drucker there with the culture eats
yes, sir.
Strategy, right?
Yes.
So, Dr. Keller, thank you very much. I apologize that I couldn't be there in person today. I'm doing some work for Harvard, and Jennifer Ash, who you met just recently, sends her regards to you as well. And we're actually
Keller knows everyone, Byron. It's
yes,
unbelievable.
I know.
Unbelievable. Anyway, keep going.
We're actually working on attendance, talking attendance this morning in rural schools, so this is appropriate. My comment ties in a couple of things that have been said, but the big thing for me is having taught in a very rural school, having been a principal in a very urban turnaround school, the issues a lot of times are the same or at least congruent. And the thing that I want to implore us and any legislators that are looking at this report is, let's not knee jerk to policy. And Katie, I brought this up to you on our call.
Yes.
We need to make sure that we've really studied the root causes. And to Katie's point about it being complex, it is very complex, right? I shared with you yesterday that when I was at Manual, one of our biggest attendance problem days was when it rained, right? And people sometimes don't think about that, what that looks like for a student that has to walk 6 blocks to school. And I know that's just a small example, but I think it goes to how complex this is. And I want to make sure that as we redesign high school, as we look at all this, that we've looked at every root cause possible and not just come up with knee-jerk pieces of policy that we think it could work and they just won't. We've got to figure this out and really look at it from the complexity that it is. Sorry, I just wanted to bring that up into that discussion. You had said that you were worried about putting it out there. I think it needs to be out there so we can begin to discuss it, but let's not forget the complexity of it.
Yes, agree, Byron, and thank you for reminding us of that. We have some actions that we're taking as a state that we would like to share with you and for the first time the general public, but I want to make sure I don't cut off discussion. Does anyone else have anything they want to add? All right. Then, John, I think we're ready to go to the next.
So in all of this complexity, I think one of the things that we're in a position to do at the state level is to hold up the mirror, which is partially what we've been doing here, right? We have a limited ability to actually, sort of ferret out the issues at a local school level and help them fix the challenges that they're facing. But how can we hold up the mirror? That's certainly one way. There may be some policies that we could do as well. But what we're going to talk about here is mostly holding up the mirror. So first of all, you're all familiar with the GPS dashboard. And really, this has been focused on a broad range of metrics around student performance and student outcomes. We're looking at this data longitudinally, so not only is it a set of data that's, some of it's new, some of it's cast in new ways, some of it's old data cast in new ways, but you can see how these things have changed over time, and we're trying to empower continuous improvement. These, none of the metrics on GPS are subject to quick changes, right? They all are going to require thoughtful, sort of layered approach. So how does that relate to attendance? Well, of the 20 indicators, some of them aspirational still and not actually on the dashboard just yet, we have privileged attendance data in 2 ways. One, probably the most obvious, is that we are tracking for each school the number of, the rate of their 94% attendance or higher students. Okay, and it's really important. This is where we come back to that opening slide where we're talking about the 3 different definitions. I think when we've been used to thinking about attendance as 90% or higher is good, and then you look at GPS and you look at schools, you notice in the top, I'll draw your attention to the yellow box on this slide. Probably the most critical piece of information here on this slide is 60% of students have an attendance rate of 94% or higher. So that shows you how sort of 2 things can be true at once, right? You can have, if you look at our ordered list of schools based on that first definition of attendance, almost all of them are at 90% or higher.
Can we pause on that?
Yeah.
So that means, to your point earlier, William, that 40 per Indiana statute on habitual absenteeism.
That's right.
That means 40% of Indiana students are habitually absent from school.
Because the state statute, the definition of habitual truancy is 10
Yes,
days unexcused.
that's what that means.
So that's 400,000.
Yep.
Yeah, quick math.
Plus.
Yes,
Yeah.
400,000 plus. Yes, sir. That's
That
significant.
gets your attention
Substantial.
more than just 40%, right?
substantial.
400,000 students plus.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you think about these different thresholds. You saw the NAEP numbers, right? 3 days makes a difference. Habitual truancy, right, which sounds horrible, right, is 10 days. And today we've only talked about chronic absenteeism, which has this super high threshold, right, of 18 days. So think about the kinds of instructional sequences that would be missed, foundational things, subject-verb agreement, or how to do division, or something, those kind of things, like just huge chunks of time that are missed, especially if they're consecutive.
The other thing that I would add, yesterday I was at a luncheon with Connexus and a lot of business leaders in advanced manufacturing, and they were asking a variety of questions to different people. But one of the things we often hear from business and industry is we just need our people to come to work. So now I'm going to say to them, and we just need our people to come to school. We just need our students to come to school as well. So again, it is a culture challenge that we have to acknowledge. If employers aren't getting people to come to work, we are facing the same challenge. Our data is clear that we are getting and having students come to school. And that's only we're only gonna overcome that as a state if we find ways to work together, and if we also have some, and I'm looking back at the Principals Association who brought this up to us a couple months ago as well, like we're seeing a problem, an increased problem. We're only gonna overcome it if we start to have some local communities try some things. We can learn from them, and then we can potentially scale it to others. So I think while we address this with urgency, we also have to call for, if there are schools who are figuring this out, if there are communities that are figuring this out and have some best practices, we'd love to hear from you and to share that out with other schools and communities.
So another way of holding up the mirror is we are doing some preliminary work around an early warning dashboard. What you're seeing on the screen is a sort of an artist's rendition of something we've been thinking about, and we've actually begun a procurement process to do something like this, and basically looking at all kinds of student data. Much of it would be the kind of data that would be already on GPS, but looking to understand how that will affect kids prospectively, right? So sort of more of a, if this pattern continues, what challenges may the student face, especially will they graduate from high school? And eventually we'd like to move that beyond just graduate from high school and going more into the entirety of the employed, enrolled, and enlisted kind of framework, but starting with the data that's easily accessible. So again, attendance is a huge factor that would be considered on such a dashboard. Which students are at risk and why? How, and these would be the kind of reports we'd be actually getting down to the classroom teacher in as much real time as possible. GPS is really at the sort of principal and superintendent level, because by the time GPS is refreshed each year, those students have left the classroom teacher where those results occurred, right? But this kind of a dashboard would actually be, you can see on that picture there that you've got a class list in front of you, right? And you're sort of seeing which kids are triggering this sort of at-risk variable and may need some intervention of one kind or another. Certainly attendance will be a major factor in that kind of data analysis. And here are some others, but again, attendance is situated as one of the primary. Next to last slide here, we each have a role to play.
Hey, John, before you hit on that, because I know we'll be asked, when will this be available? And I can speak to it. You're welcome to add on. We currently have a request for proposals to build this additional piece onto Indiana GPS to support schools, parents, families, and knowing what the predictive analytics shows. Our plan is to pilot it in some schools this present school year, and our goal is to have it ready available for all schools to use next school year.
Yep. Those proposals are in. I haven't seen them yet, but I know that's kind of where we're at in the process. So, all right. Last slide here. Certainly, as has come up several times already, this is a problem that's not going to have a single solution. We certainly need parents, families, schools, and I think another fair term would be communities to lean in on this and find solutions, knowing that those solutions are probably going to vary across all of those groups, right? And then how could the board and the department help here? Data transparency, sort of my term was holding up the mirror, right? Working with professional associations to understand root causes and really encouraging collaborative solutions, right? We have to sort of acknowledge the problem and say, what are we going to do about it? So I'll just pause there and see if there are additional discussion or questions.
Looking around at the board, any additional discussion or questions on this topic? Pat?
I would just say thanks, right? I mean, we've addressed the problem. We thought it was a problem. We've got our data in place, but you've already taken the next step of trying to help schools by being able to identify those kids quickly with a dashboard view to say, hey, you know, we need to get some services in to figure out why this student isn't able to come to school. Back to Erica's response, right? What's going on? And what do we need to do to help that student be able to get to school? So very proactive, and appreciate the work from the department, and John, your team at doing that.
Thank you, Pat. Any other? Yes, William.
So I brought this up on our call, and I don't know what can be done, but there, in my opinion, has to be a way to hold parents of minors accountable for those students not coming to school, other than, you know, they're sick or whatever the case may be. So I don't know what can be done about that, but in my opinion, something has to be done, because in my household growing up, it was not an option. Right. Going to school was not an option.
Right. Right. Thank you.
And I have a feeling as a dad, you held your son to that same
Absolutely.
standard. Yes, sir. Any other comments or thoughts? Yes, Greg.
Just real quick.
You could pull your mic in just a little.
I'm so tall. So to the culture piece that you talked about, I mean, how many Hoosier parents really understand the importance of going to school? Like all the data we just talked about. Like, you know, I read. Do they realize how important it is you start reading to your kid at a young age? I mean, can we start campaigning to Hoosier parents, whether it's TV or whatever, that allows parents to know how important it is we start reading to our kids? Because I think it all starts at home. Right? I love what we're saying here, but if we can't give the parents the knowledge, somehow get it to them, you know, the importance of going to school every day. You know, I see it where, and this was post-COVID, but hey, we're going to go on a vacation. This is the cheapest time to go on a cruise, so we're going to go for a cruise for a week. That never happened.
No.
Right? Because the importance of school, like you can't miss school.
That's right.
And now we're going to live our best life, which I understand, but to what you said, then 5 years later, I don't go to work this week, so I'm going to live my best life. So we're starting to see this trickle down. So I think we've got to inform our parents to understand the importance of going to school and the importance of reading.
Well, and it's it has to be a partnership, right? I mean, this is not a point fingers situation. This is, here's the reality of where we are as a society in our country, in our state, and how can we work together to overcome this challenge. Your point about almost like the public service announcements, we are actively doing public service announcements on radio and TV about reading. But maybe for our communications team, we might think about other ways to expand that to other information that might be beneficial for parents, family, community leaders. So we'll think on that. The other thing that is not out there enough yet, but based on parents reaching out and saying, hey, what can I do to help my child to read? Now, it's not all the parents, but enough, right? The Indiana Learning Lab, under the leadership of Diana Smith, built out, not only do we have an educator arm that's massive in the Indiana Learning Lab, they built out a parent arm to support those parents. But I do 100% agree, Greg. There are other strategies and steps that we could go a step forward on.
Could we give that media to the school districts? I mean, we all have ways to communicate with all of our parents. They may not watch TV, they may not get mail, but boy, I could put that in Parent Square and send that out.
The video clip?
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the comms team, and they are avoiding eye contact right now. Because we always come out with action items that are good.
But I mean, let's target them.
We could easily send that video clip out so that schools could flip to parents, families, and make it easier.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. Erica?
I think that'd be very beneficial because unfortunately, I feel like what happened with COVID is a lot of parents saw that their kids didn't have to actually come into the building, and then a lot of them passed.
Yeah.
And they felt, maybe they don't have to be there as often, and it just...
So that was signaling that...
Yeah, because we haven't seen the rate go back to at least what it was before COVID just yet. So maybe the mindset that developed is they don't have to be there as frequently, but just to let them know, look at our state scores as a result, look at individual scores and the schools, just so they have an idea of what the impact has truly been.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
And Dr. Jenner, just one
Yes,
more
sir.
point. You know, really since 2016, elections have been micro-targeting constituents, right? So social media, all eyes are moving to social media now. I mean, I don't think a lot of us watch TV much anymore. So if there's a way we can start using social media, then the algorithms start hitting the parents and they start seeing it more. Right? I think that would be very powerful to get that message out.
See the impact on the individual
It's just
students to
start
inform
seeing it. If I
their...
see it, right?
Yeah.
He'll see, I mean, just how it works. And that's what parents are looking at. People are on their screen all the time.
Right.
So if we can figure that out, that could be a great
Right.
way to get the message
Maybe
out.
we'll just do a meme of like you and some of the points you made today.
You're
and
not
we'll
getting
just
any
like
views.
ship that out.
Radio, yes.
I mean,
Radio,
it's an
yes.
idea. Kristen,
one of the things that really kind of struck me that I was thinking about as a parent of an elementary student right now who just missed school on Monday because she was sick, when we start linking the data of kids missing at an early age to being able to pass the I read and the I learn test, and that, I think if parents start to understand that all stacks up and eventually leads to a successful career, if we could show the longitudinal connections between kids having good attendance at elementary school leads to kids, I mean, in my opinion, the kids that feel like they're able to successfully do class are there more often. The kids that struggle are the ones that, I mean, they don't want to come because it's hard and it's no fun for them. Well, a lot of times, why is it hard and no fun? Because they missed out on a lot of the key points, that you guys mentioned earlier about, these huge chunks of learning that are foundational are being missed. And that's just leading to more struggle and I think more absenteeism as they move up into the high school level.
yeah, good point. Thank you, Kristen. All right, so I don't see any other hands up. What a great discussion. Thank you for that. This is the first time we have released that publicly, this data publicly to the state. I'm sure it will generate a lot more conversation. The one thing I would challenge all of us, and this has been a common theme in our discussion, which is we don't have time to admire the problem. We have to get after solutions. And it's going to take solutions at the state level. We shared one that we're actively working on, and it's going to take solutions at the local level in order to overcome this challenge and get students to school so that we can serve them in the best way we can. On that note, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
With a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much, those of you online. Thank you all.